Today on the MrMaple Show podcast, Matt and Tim count down the top 20 Linearilobum Japanese maples.
Konnichiwa, y'all, and welcome to the MrMaple Show podcast. Today, Tim and I are going to break down some different types of Japanese maples for you. If you hadn't already found our show before, it's the only talk show that's all about Japanese maples. We're going to be doing the top 20 Linearilobum Japanese maples today.
Hey, y'all, I'm Tim. That's my brother, Matt. We're MrMaple.com, the family mail order business. We ship directly to your door, and we do over 1,000 varieties of Japanese maples. So if you like this podcast, make sure you subscribe, but also remember to shop on MrMaple.com.
All right, let's get into it a little bit. We're going to tell you our top 20 in this category. But first, we're going to kind of break down what is a Linearilobum Japanese maple. What's that all about? It's an interesting category. It's not a true botanical distinction of like family, but there's certainly a set of traits that fit and define into this category, especially within Japanese maples. And they're very unique. They add one of the more whimsical feels to a garden. I often talk about this when we talk about Linearilobums, but I don't think there's anything that adds the Asian gardening aesthetic more than a Linearilobum Japanese maple.
Now, I've always realized this was a group. People often call it the Linearilobum group, but I never pieced together in the back of my mind that this wasn't something that doesn't occur in the wild until I was reading that in Maples of the World. And I was like, that's kind of interesting. I mean, this is something that's been cultivated in gardens as a distinctive garden variety, which means basically you've got, Acer palmatum or Acer aminum, depending on how you classify the species, and then you've got variety Linearilobum. Mm-hmm. And so that means it's pretty cool. It's different, but it's not something you find actually out there in the wild. Cor Van Gelderen actually puts it in one of his groups whenever he tried to classify maples into different groupings. And I like his groupings. I don't think it's perfect, but I think it's probably the best thing we've got so far. Whenever he started trying to develop a way for classifying all Japanese maples. And he says that the Linearilobum group, he calls it Group 8, extremely narrow, sometimes strap-like leaves, divide the leaf base define this group. The first flush in the spring, sometimes with wider lobes, but they mature to show the true characteristic of this group. A good example can be found in Koto no Ito.
Now, I love that this category, this grouping of trees, will mimic that of bamboo. Now, these are definitely, we're talking about Japanese maples, but they're going to mimic bamboo-like qualities and textures in the garden. And we talked in our Jay Sifford podcast a lot about textures. And I get that relaxing vibe from this section. Like, it's something that just kind of evokes relaxation for me. Maybe it's the bamboo look of it or just the breezy, open airiness of that Linearilobum foliage. But I don't know that much brings it. And with Japanese maples, you not only have that non-invasive root system that gets you away from that bamboo category, which has pretty invasive root systems, but you have spring color, fall color, and winter interest bark. So you have a whole lot going on there that makes this far superior to what bamboo can bring to the Asian garden.
Yeah, and it's real interesting with these Japanese maples. I mean, there's some trees that are close to being a Linearilobum, but they kind of close to not being too. Like Acer subuldianum Shoryu no Sume. Mm-hmm. I mean, you've got long pointed leaves, but it's not quite a Linearilobum. I mean, it may be the most Linearilobum thing that you've seen in a subuldianum, but it's not a Linearilobum. And then Peve Dave, I mean, it's close. It's one of the closest things I've seen to Linearilobum without being one.
The new growth can certainly make it feel that way. I mean, I would put it more in the Matsumure grouping overall once the leaf matures, but I could certainly see how you could get there. There's so many interesting things. We're going to break down our top 20. We're going to give you some honorable mentions. And I think it's an interesting category. If you're not familiar with this grouping of Japanese maples, I would certainly say consider finding some of these and adding them to your garden. Texture-wise, they're going to make such a beautiful interest. But I think there's just something magical about them, especially in that garden. You know, it gives you that kind of wind chimes, birds chirping, just relaxing day effect. And I think that's what a lot of people go to Japanese maples for. I've had doctors tell me that they just wouldn't have made it through their year without their Biniotaki. And getting out there and sitting under their Biniotaki and just watching that thing and relaxing and kind of being part of nature with it. I feel like a lot of the Linearilobums evoke that. You can normally get under them. A lot of these are a little bit mid to larger trees. Some are small, but you kind of get to interact with them a little bit more. They kind of become a bigger piece of your landscape over time.
I know that there has been a large number of people throughout the years that fall in love with Linearilobums. Mm-hmm. I see, Makawa is our thing that we've just fell in love with, and we've really promoted the Makawas. Ghost types, people fall in love with those. I would say Linearilobum's that next category of things that people fall in love with and mass plant in their gardens, every variety they can get. Mm-hmm. I know there's someone over here in Flat Rock that does it.
Right, we need to visit his garden.
I know that with Bill Zipperman, I know that there's plenty of other people that collect every Linearilobum that they can get their hands on. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting. My first, one time I got tricked. I thought whenever we came to our very first Maple Society meeting, we were Acer palmatum fanatics. And I thought I saw the coolest Linearilobum ever. Mark Krautman had brought to the meeting an Acer pinophyllum.
Oh, yeah.
One of the rarest maples in the world.
Kind of fits into that category, even as a species, so it kind of could break that definition a little bit. Chinese maple, one of the rarest maples in the world, down to about zone 7, so it's tricky for us here. Through about zone 11, I've seen some places growing that one.
But the interesting thing about Acer pinophyllum is in our climate, it doesn't leaf out until June. Because
it's been on the burn pile more than once at our nursery.
And so you think that the tree's dead because everything else has been leafed out, and then all of a sudden, here comes in leaf Acer pinophyllum.
We're getting some more genetics from that one. I mean, that was one that was so rare that there was only one collection. And as we're getting to more genetics in that one, hopefully we're finding some different ways to propagate that one and maybe push zones a little bit more with it. It seems like some of those newer genetics have been a little bit more forgiving as to not being in leaf until June.
Now, before we get into this top 20 list, we're going to give you a couple honorable mentions. And these are honorable mentions simply because they're not in heavy cultivation yet. Both of these trees are really amazing next level Linearilobums. You're going to want to check out whenever we make them available here at Mr. Maple.
Both of them are in the works at Mr. Maple too. So.
That they are.
All right, let's jump right into it. We did a podcast on Dick Vandermatt. One of his introductions, Fina, is kind of a pinkish colored fairy hair.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably one of the most pink-red selections of fairy hair that I've seen. Very similar in its extreme thin Linearilobum style. Brand new to us, though. I mean, something I don't know that much about. It's brand new here at the Mr. Maple farm. And to me, it's a winner.
Got a set of those that are 1 gallons that'll be going into stock plant production. So we'll be able to get more and more of those into production here. So Fina, be looking for that one. Another one that's pretty next level by our friend Bart, Silver Sword.
Yeah, and this is one that just blows my mind because it's a Linearilobum, and we have seen photos of this tree in the Pacific Northwest with Ukigumo-like variegation on a Linearilobum.
Love when a name fits a tree. That Silver Sword, pretty dope. Got that elongated look to it, and kind of a Linearilobum crossover with Ukigumo. I think you nailed it. That's kind of what that one does. Again, in production here at Mr. Maple, maybe a year or two out on that one as far as availability, but it's coming. That one, we're going to try to build some pretty significant numbers in before it hits the market. But I think you're going to love seeing Fina and Silver Sword when those are out there.
So, guys, we're getting to the top 20 list. We're going to break right into it. At number 20, we've got one of Talon Buckholtz's very first introductions, Acer palmatum Red Cloud.
Yeah, I guess technically this would be a second introduction ever. This was a sister seedling, or at least in the same seed bed with fairy hair. So Talon Buckholtz over 45 years ago was going through some seeds from Scullio prindifolum, and he found Red Cloud and fairy hair in that same setting. Now, fairy hair was his first ever selection. I guess that makes Red Cloud his second. Absolutely great plant, though. One that's a little underrated. Beautiful Linearilobum. Bright red colorations, this one. I've had some of the better fire glow kind of reds on this I've seen.
Yeah, and Red Cloud is a Linearilobum, so it's open and airy. I get why he sees the clouds when he sees this. If you look up into one of these, it's going to look very open and airy, very cloud-like with some good red color. Strong, vigorous, upright, can handle a little bit of heat. It does green up a little bit during the summer, but for a red Linearilobum that's going to give you some of that Asian aesthetic out there in the garden and be able to see into the branch structure, Red Cloud coming in at number 20 on our top 20 Linearilobums.
That one's going to work zones 5 through 9, typically be about 8 to 10 feet tall in a 10-year span, and just give you a nice round canopy. That was one of the other things about it, for that cloud-like appearance, as a nice rounded overall canopy. Kind of fits for what a lot of people are looking for. I mean, I mentioned Fire Glow. It's kind of the Fire Glow version of a Linearilobum. You kind of got that mid-sized tree, great bright reds, great bright red fall color. Right in the middle as far as height, not your biggest one, not your smallest one, kind of right in the middle, which fits a lot of landscapes. All right, guys, coming in here at number 19, we've got the Red Spider.
Now, Red Spider is a selection that I don't really know who introduced it. I often wonder if it was introduced by Harold Johnson, because he also introduced Twisted Spider, which looks very similar in its habit. And Harold was known to put multiple names on the same tree.
He kills me sometimes on nomenclature. Yeah, he'll have a couple trees and they'll be offered for these years under this name, and then going forward after a certain year under a different name. So that's a good speculation. Now, this one is a little bit more rare. You don't see it in cultivation quite as much. Typically around 12 to 15 feet, so a little bit larger. Mid-size, again, not gigantic, but mid-size. Again, most of these are going to work zones 5 through 9. We'll talk about when they don't. Very, very durable, though. One we think originating from Alabama, being a Harold Johnson introduction, that has kind of stood the test of time for being very heat tolerant as well.
Now, I could see this also being an introduction that was just from somewhere that grew daylilies prolifically. Because if you know anything about the spider daylilies, they also have these blossoms that are look very similar, with elongated blossoms that hang down and droop, similar to what a Linearilobum leaf looks like. So I kind of get that sort of play on things. Now, one thing about Red Spider that's different than other red Linearilobum selections is this is one that goes upwards but also goes outward. So specimens of this will actually be more wide-spreading than your typical strap-leaf Japanese maple, which is typically a little more narrow in its shape.
All right, y'all, coming in here at number 18, we're moving quite along. We got Miyama Nishiki. Now, this is an interesting introduction. Very dark colors on this one, typically very bold maroon early. It does green up a little bit early in the summer, but you get a cool malting effect with that. So you get kind of a greener, reddish growth going on over top of that, which I think gives it a lot of contrast within itself.
Now, I have seen some photos of this photoshopped to sort of exaggerate what this tree does, but new growth during the summer are a little more Matsumuri than the Aminum irregular growth that you typically get out of Linearilobums. Normally, the new growth flushes in the summer are a little bit wider, look a little more Aminum-like. This one gets a little more Matsumuri. Some people have photoshopped this to show lace leaves on the.
That was kind of the rumor back in the day, wasn't it?
Yeah, the rumor was that you had got lace leaves and Linearilobums on this at the same time.
I haven't truly seen that happen.
I've seen a more Matsumuri on the summer new growth flush. So, but a lace leaf, I mean, maybe if you exaggerate it in a different condition, maybe. But to me, the photos look photoshopped.
Right. Yeah, I feel like that one's a bit of a stretch. But what it is in itself is an amazing tree. Great orangey red fall color, more red typically late. Really a showstopper, though. Again, another one with more of a rounded canopy to it. So if you're growing this one, it tends to be a little bit more multi-stemmed, a little bit denser than some of the other upright, faster growing forms.
Well, where we talked about Red Cloud and Red Spider, those were more cherry red. Mm-hmm. This is going to be more of that purple red, that darker red color.
Right. The color changes on this one remind me a little bit more of something like a Nabashidari.
Yeah, it does. And the leaf shape on the back is a little more rounded on the back side of the Linearilobum, which is different than what many other Linearilobums do. So it grabs your attention a little bit on the leaf shape. The leaf shape is truly different and will stand out from any of the other strap leaf styles.
All right, y'all, we're moving quite along here. We're going through the top 20 Linearilobums. We're at number 17, and we've got Incan.
Another name for this is Aikenless. If you see that out there, that is the exact same tree. It's basically different ways of saying the exact same thing. Incan is a Linearilobum style that is typically shorter and wider. So this is a dark purple-red Linearilobum style. Fits in smaller spaces on the height-wise, but gives you some width out there in the garden.
Yeah, a 12-foot tree could easily be 10 foot wide, so you got a big spread going on there. Very, very dark colorations. Again, this one's going to work zones 5 through 9. This was first brought back to Europe and introduced. It might have been from Japan originally by Esfeld around 1991. And that's kind of when it first starts to kind of gain more popularity, and we see this one more in the trade.
Guys, coming at number 16, we have Acer palmatum atrolineare. This is one of the most classic Linearilobum selections of a red Linearilobum. It gives you some good red color throughout the season, brighter cherry picked up red, a good vigorous form, and that narrow shape, so it fits in a lot of smaller gardens.
I mean, we liked a lot of the greens early, didn't we? We put a lot of the reds lower down. That's an underrated plant, often referred to as ribbon leaf. I hate that name. You'll see it sometimes sold as ribbon leaf, though.
Oh, my goodness. Don't call it ribbon leaf.
Right, I know. I don't know why. That just sounds like nails on a chalkboard to me. Again, zones 5 through 9, typically around 10 foot in 10 years, so a foot of growth a year is not uncommon on atrolineare. Probably the most basic definition of a Linearilobum would be atrolineare. It's kind of the quintessential.
Yeah, I would say other than just Linearilobum, right. The green, what people sometimes put on another cultivar, that is probably the most quintessential red strap leaf Japanese maple. One of the oldest selections, has a very atro, meaning red, lineare, meaning Linearilobum, a very Latin name. So the name isn't really the best, doesn't roll off the tongue that well, but it doesn't sound as bad as some other ones we may be talking about in a little bit.
All right, yeah.
But atrolineare, a classic tree, stood the test of time, easy to use in the gardens, and you will find this tree all across the world because it is so popular.
All right, y'all, coming in here at number 15, we've got a Talon Buchholz introduction in Acer palmatum Little Fingers.
Yeah, Little Fingers. I ran across this tree in Charlottesville, Virginia, before I ever knew that Talon introduced this tree, and it struck me. It struck a chord with me.
Literally right in the face.
No, it didn't actually strike me in the face. But it's a tiny Linearilobum selection with green leaves.
I mean, it's Little Fingers. It wouldn't hurt if it did hit you. It would be like a big hand hitting you.
It'd be like a slap from a baby.
Right. It's like a baby slap. I got a 2-year-old. He can hit me all day on this. Little Fingers is fun, though. It's got a great name to it. Beautiful little small green, compact habit to it, typically 6 to 8 foot, so a little smaller overall tree in that more 6 foot in a 10 to 15 year range.
Typically almost as wide as it is tall, though. And that's the thing about this dwarf, fits in small spaces, and it may, in fact, be one of the smallest of all the Linearilobums. And that's why I had to make my number 15 spot on the list, even though it's not common in the trade.
Yeah, and a lot of these greens and a lot of these reds are going to be on the exceptional side for heat tolerance. I mean, we haven't really talked about the heat tolerance of these Linearilobums, but a lot of these Little Fingers does pretty well. I mean, it's growing in a lot of sun there in that garden. Going to work zones 5 through 9. And again, a lot of durability in a zone 8 setting.
So guys, coming at number 14, we've got a Linearilobum that was one of our first Linearilobums we started growing here at Mr. Maple. Dad started growing it years ago. We've got Acer palmatum. I'm not talking about a disease. I'm talking about Scolopendrifolium.
Oh man, I heard you got that Scolopendrifolium in the card.
Hey,
you might want to get some meds to fix that up. I hear they can get that to clear up now.
hey, good news, but maybe not. It does have another name, but its name also sounds like a disease. Shinabugaoka.
Now, I'm sticking with the Scolopendrifolium. That is a mouthful in and of itself. I will tell you, it's a great tree. Now, if it was called green bamboo or just bamboo, people would go crazy for this one. I love the darker bark you get on this one to the green foliage. It gives you a nice contrast within itself from the bark also to the leaf shape. And now it's a Linearilobum with a lush green, make it a larger tree, typically around 18 to 20 feet. And it fills out quite nicely, typically over a foot of growth a year.
Now, there are some trees labeled Linearilobum or Linearifolium that appear to also be the same thing as Scolopendrifolium. So this is a tree that may have many different names, and whether or not they are the same, I can't tell the difference between them, which means, what's the point if there are actually different selections? But Scolopendrifolium is a great tree, vigorous. The green strap-like leaves out there in the garden do give that bamboo essence and just attract a lot of people. This is an amazing tree, and it's possibly the best tree with the worst name.
Yeah, it's Scolopendrifolium. That is a bit of a mouthful for sure. Beautiful plant, though. Now, again, it's a nice one for a larger setting. Can shade out some smaller plants. Very great for its differentiation in colors. Typically more of a bold red in the fall, which is nice, coming from that green coloration.
Yeah, awesome tree to use in the garden. I mean, the Linearilobums give just such a soft feel in the garden as the wind blows. It just gives a very unique perspective, a unique texture, and it's a fun tree to play out with out in the garden. Scolopendrifolium, a tree more people should be growing, even though it has such a horrible name. Guys, coming at number 13, we've got Acer palmatum red pygmy.
So red pygmy is another introduction by our friends at Esfeld Plantinium. This one was found at the same time as Villa Toronto. He was giving a garden talk in Italy, touring this garden, and red pygmy really stood out to him. It was a seedling there in the garden. Great name. I think there's a lot to be said for having a good name. Red pygmy has been a standard in the industry for 20 plus years, and part of that's because people identify with what it is.
Yeah, being a red Linearilobum, it's got that red color. Pygmy, because it gets typically about as wide as it is tall. You know, I don't think it's as pygmy as they might have originally first thought. I know Bill Shell's talking about how fast it grew for him down in Alabama in the heat, but he's also growing it in a high canopy setting where the tree is going to stretch out a little bit in a more shaded situation. But such an amazing tree, good red color, some of those cherry reds to brick red colors, and appears to be a very stable Linearilobum.
I've seen people selling this one as just pygmy as well. I believe that's the exact same plant. All right, guys, coming in here at number 12, moving right along, we've got Acer palmatum kinbu. Now, this is actually an introduction by our friend Masayoshi Yano. We did a podcast recently on Yano-san, just kind of memorializing him. Kinbu is a pretty interesting introduction of green Linearilobum that the master himself, Yano-san, came up with.
Now, one of the things that Yano really appreciated is when you put a plant in the sun and you get some bronze coloring on it. A lot of his selections actually have that going on some of his green selections that he introduced into the nursery trade. And kinbu is one of those, if you're growing it in full sun, you'll get some bronzing across the green, just giving it something extra out there in the garden. You know, that's untypical of what in America we would often select. We'd often select a pure green, a pure red. But he'll often choose he would often choose a Japanese maple because it got that bronzing. Like Nishiki Yamato that he introduced, that was a pine bark. It leafed out with some bronze first and then went green. Kinbu can also give you some of that bronze color. And it has a leaf shape that's a little irregular for what you think of as a Linearilobum as well.
Now, Yano-san found this one around 1990, kind of started getting into the trade from there. You don't see it in the U.S. as much. I know we've been producing it as well as Talon for years, so you will find it on our website. Kinbu, though, one of those in the Yano-san introduction list. We'll have to get a whole list of all Yano's introductions at some point that we have. Guys, let's keep it moving. Number 11, we've got Hub's Red Willow.
Now, I do believe this to be the same thing that you will see in Vertru's 4th edition as Willow Leaf. They appear to be the same tree. That is just someone has sort of shortened up the name.
Again,
Hub's Red Willow.
Ooh, nails on a chalkboard.
Yes, I know.
Oh, I hate that.
But Hub's Red Willow, Hubb Red Willow, is a selection that was introduced into the nursery trade by Red Maple Nurseries in Lima, Pennsylvania. Dick Wolf, who introduced Emperor One and many other plants, obviously knew a guy named Hub.
Right.
Not Hupp.
Yeah, not to be confused with the Hupps of Hupp's Dwarf. Hubb on Hub's Red Willow, Hupp on Hupp's Dwarf.
But Hub's Red Willow is an immaculate, upright Linearilobum with good red color. One of the best of the red Linearilobum styles. A strong, vigorous grower, and makes a beautiful specimen in the garden each and every time. We've got a gorgeous one of these at the Buckholz farm we just recently filmed a cultivar highlight with. And guys, if you don't know it, we actually have a component to this podcast on our YouTube as well, accompanying with photos. So you can go through and follow us along there as well. Make sure you're subscribed to the MrMaple Show on YouTube.
Yeah, it was actually named for Elwood Hub. I just did it to myself, of Riverton, New Jersey. Been around a while. We typically list this one as 10 to 12 foot in about 10 years. So medium grower. Really great colorations on this one, though. And you get that whimsical open look to it. I really like this plant. It's one of our more popular ones. We sell a ton of Hub's Red Willow, and we've got a breakdown coming up soon, if we hadn't already, on a beautiful specimen.
One of the other things is this tree, Hub's Red Willow, has started falling on many of our employees' top fives. We've been shooting a lot of top fives coming out with a lot of our employees, so you can get an introduction to some people that are working behind the scenes here at Mr. Maple for our YouTube channel. And many of them are starting to select Hubb's Red Willow on their lists. And that's kind of shocking to me. It's not one that I would have guessed would have fell right in, but they're starting to see this tree more and more as we carry it more. And it's cool to see them starting to appreciate so many cool Japanese maples, including Hubb's Red Willow.
Coming in here next at number 10, we've got Fukunagashi.
Yeah, Fukunagashi is a selection. It was brought over from Japan about 2008. It's got a silver sheen to it with an irregular Linearilobum style leaf. It can get very pointed at times, and it can have one of the more silver sheen looking leaves of any of the Linearilobum styles.
Yeah, you get a weird glossy effect on this one. The name means windswept, typically around 6 to 8 foot in 10 years. I do recommend giving Fukunagashi some protection from the hot afternoon sun. We found that it's not one that loves high heat, full sun exposures. Really a cool plant, though. You get some weird malting kind of colors going on in this one as well. It's another one that's kind of so dark green that you kind of get a multi kind of color effect going on, at least midsummer for this one.
One thing that I found that's interesting about this Linearilobum selection is that the edge on a Linearilobum is typically straight. I mean, it's a linear lobum. It's got a line to each and every lobe. This one will often have curves in the lobe itself, which just gives it something a little different. And it kind of breaks what you think of as a typical Linearilobum.
Awesome plant. Very, very interesting one. And I think one that's you don't see as common anymore these days. When we first started doing this, a lot of trees, I've been doing this 20 years plus now. And a lot of the trees you saw common in the trade, Fukunagashi was one you used to see around more. I don't think it's as common these days.
No, I really don't. Coming at number 9, we've got Acer palmatum Aoyagigawa. Now, when we say Aoyagigawa, this is also a term that originally was used for Aoyagi. Aoyagigawa is different in the fact that this is a green Linearilobum with a little bit of green bark to it as well. Not as much green bark as Aoyagi itself, but this is it's probably a very yellow-green Linearilobum.
I would say what really sets this one apart for me is the yellow fall color. Great yellow in the fall. Outstanding coloration there. 6 to 8 foot in 10 years. Again, another zone 5 through 9. Has handled a good bit of sun for us. It's been fairly sun tolerant overall. Aoyagigawa tends to be a great grower too. Typically a foot of growth a year, and just a nice overall tree.
Now, Aoyagigawa is, once you see a specimen out in the landscape, I know we saw some out at Talon's old home, and you start to get a real appreciation for the colors this tree can do out there in the garden. The shape, shorter, denser, wide, more yellow-green on its colors. Definitely a tree that stands out when it comes to the Linearilobum styles.
All right, one of our all-time fan favorites coming up here at number 8. In fact, I'd probably put this one further down the list for me. Probably should have argued more with my brother on that. But at number 8, I got Punkil.
Yeah, Punkil. This is named after the gentleman who runs the Chilipo Arboretum in Korea. And it is a darker purple-red color, strong, vigorous, upright habit, and more of a narrow shape overall.
Yeah, Tim's the joke with this one was forever that Tim knew it meant, he looked it up in Korean. The name translates as a gentle breeze. And that happens to be what Mr. Punkil's name does translate at. Not what it was selected for as a tree. He was the curator there for many years. I believe good friends with Talon, also good friends with Barry Yinger. A lot of our interesting plant mentors there. Beautiful tree around 6 to 8 foot in 10 years. I think this one's so next level because of the color. It's got a very purplish colored bark. It's got a very purplish colored leaf. You get that dark maroon to purple color going on. And I think it's one of the all-time darkest. So I like pairing this one with a lot of the other ones because of that color dynamic you get. Absolutely beautiful plant. It's done pretty well for us in high heat settings. So Punkil's been a good one for sun up to zone 8. It's been exceptionally durable there. And I think it's just one that adds, a whole new aesthetic to the garden. And I think that color pattern and the overall shape of it tends to be a little bit more domed, rounded canopy. It kind of looks lace leaf-ish sometimes in the landscape, giving it a real nice appearance. I think it's one of the more popular ones for good reason.
Now, coming in at number 7, we've got Acer palmatum Kenshi. Now, this is a dwarf compact green, and I don't want this to be confused with Genshi, which is a more dwarf bronze selection. Not that common in the trade. Probably could have made one of our honorable mentions with Genshi. We're talking about Acer palmatum Kenshi. It's really like a yellow-green, dense, compact, one of the more thin leaf Linearilobum selections.
Yeah, this one is a nice one, typically around 6 to 8 foot in 10 years. Decent Mortal Kombat character, and only got his butt kicked if you had somebody a little bit stronger. He was a blind guy, I think, in Mortal Kombat. Didn't mind him, though. He was all right. Beautiful tree, though, zones 5 through 9. Now, Kenshi has a little bit denser look to it overall, so you get a lot of density going on to it. It's not quite as stretched out as some of the other upright greens. More of a ball shape on this one, which gives it a really unique habit unto itself.
The name itself, Kenshi, means with golden threads, and that's because it does have that sort of yellow-green kind of color to it, and being shorter and denser, this fits in a lot of people's gardens, and it really can get more of that ball shape to it, especially if you grow this tree as a container plant. As with all container Japanese maples, we do recommend got really good drainage. That's true with all Japanese maples on the ground as well. But with containers, you really want to make sure you give good drainage.
All right, guys, coming in here at number 6, we've got another one I could see going higher up. Beni Otaki. Now, Beni Otaki means red bamboo. So if you see one out there named red bamboo and it's a maple, no reason to double up, guys. Same plant. Beni Otaki is kind of the quintessential upright red. It's durable. It's fast growing. It's one we've been growing here for many, many years, and it fits in a lot of great situations. It's kind of the blood good, the Emperor One maybe, of the Linearilobum group reds.
Yeah, this is a selection that was found by Edsel Woods and sold to many different nurserymen. Edsel Wood had an interesting way of introducing trees into the trade from what I hear, and he would find all these cool trees, and then he would host spaghetti dinners, and then he would auction off his coolest trees. Beni Otaki got out to many nurseries through some of these auctions and really got into the nursery trade in a big way. Edsel Wood, a very interesting collector who made some interesting selections, being Ed Wood number 1, Ed Wood number 2, aka Ed Wood number 1 was Algiton, which Talon Buchholz introduced later. And then we also have Redwood and Beni Otaki.
Great plant, though. Beni Otaki, a vigorous, typically in that 18-foot kind of range, around 15 years, over a foot of growth a year, heat tolerant, open, airy, great plant to be growing. I think a lot of people are familiar with Beni Otaki for good reason. Tends to be one of our more popular of this entire grouping.
Yeah, I mean, I love it because it's one of the most vigorous, and the colors are some of the brightest reds. And we're talking the brighter reds, not those deeper maroons in the early spring. And it just grabs your attention out there in the garden. We've got a gorgeous specimen of this at Maplewood Gardens, and it was one of our very first red Linearilobums we started growing. And I started to realize everybody loves this tree for a reason. Every nurseryman is producing this tree for a reason. And it's not just because the name translates as red bamboo. I mean, you'll see this tree out there as that as well. It's because this tree does exactly what you want a red Linearilobum to do.
All right, guys, we're down to the top 5. We're down to the top 5. Let us know in the comments section, or go to our Facebook group and let us know your top 5 Linearilobums. These are ours. We're going to break them down. Hey, now, when we did our favorite introductions by Talon Buchholz, Talon's been sure to point out to me several times that Fairy Hair didn't make the list, so I don't want my legs broken by the Godfather.
It's his first introduction.
Yeah, I'm not getting my legs broken off by the Godfather of Maples again. So, guys, coming in here at number 5, we've got Acer Palmatum Fairy Hair. That is Talon Buchholz's first introduction over 45 years ago. We've got some crazy specimens of this at Buchholz Farm. And to be fair, I have since warmed up to this tree a lot. I do list this one a little bit more 6 through 9. I think it can be trickier in colder environments. Sometimes a little trickier to shut down in western North Carolina for our late frost and things like that. But when you get this thing happy and in the right location, dang, it's hard to beat it for how it looks.
Yeah, I mean, it really does look like hairs on a fairy.
Oh, gosh.
It has
cringe level 100.
It has such long leaves that almost look like needles. And that's what is interesting about this tree, is it looks almost conifer-like out there in the garden.
That I'll agree with. It does look conifer-like. I've loved the fall color, too. You can get these weird pink reds in the fall right before it gets into like the blazing red fall color. It's so open and whimsical that it can look like needles on a pine. Like, it can very much look like a conifer. It is the most strapped leaf of all the strapped leaf maples. It's the most heavily divided, the thinnest.
So are you saying that Talon should have named this pine needles instead of fairy hair?
I'm just saying I've never seen fairy hair to compare it to like you. You seem to have a lot more experience with knowing what fairy hair looks like. It actually looks like the hair on a fairy is what he said. So I don't know. I'm just saying I've seen a pine tree. I've never seen a dang fairy in the garden.
Fairy hair, though, is a very unique and special Linearilobum. It's one of the most special Linearilobums whenever it comes to being the most thread-like leaf of anything we've seen. Now,
it looks just like a unicorn. Like, I don't know what does a unicorn look like.
Now, Finna might be a competitor to fairy hair at some point.
Yeah.
If we got this in the trade, it continued to grow like fairy hair and give you good pink red color, Finna might jump up the list quite high. But right now with fairy hair, I mean, there's nothing else quite like it. I know once I saw one called Fairy Hair Sister that was kind of a red fairy hair. I wonder if that's what became Finna. Not 100% sure, but they have that style. Now, the interesting thing about fairy hair is this was found in the same seed flight as we mentioned earlier with Red Cloud. It is a reoccurring type trait that comes off of Scolopendrifolium. J.D. Vertrees also had one. We actually saw it, and it's in our J.D. Vertrees walkthrough, is a selection he called Koto Ito Kamachi. Different. There's also a Koto Ito Kamachi that can be
right.
that looks more Koto no Ito like.
Right, there's so many mix-ups from back then.
That was brought in from Japan. He had sort of tried to put a name together, Koto Ito Kamachi, for his fairy hair like tree, which actually predated fairy hair. So cool that this is a reoccurring trait. I mean, I've seen seedlings of Scolopendrifolium with that thin like leaf that it's just so unique and special.
Yeah, I love fairy hair. It's an interesting one. Go watch our breakdown on YouTube where we show you some of the very first two grafts of fairy hair. They're the largest two on the planet. They're 45-year-old grafts. There's one in the ground there at Buckholtz Nursery in one of our main gardens.
And one for sale in a box.
Yeah, and one for sale in a box if you want to buy a 45-year-old fairy hair. Yeah, that'll put that on the Christmas list. All right, guys, coming in here at number 4, we've got another classic maple. I mentioned it earlier. Introduction by SFL Plantinium. We've got Villa Toronto.
Yeah, Villa Toronto, found at Villa Toronto Gardens. Found in the same gardens as Red Pygmy. This tree gets about as tall as it does wide, 6 to 7 feet in height, 6 to 7 foot in width. The thing I like about this is you get a multitude of colors on the foliage. So you get some bronzes, some reds, some mauve reds, and then you get some lighter colors in there of lime greens with that, creating a dynamic contrast against itself. But Linearilobums too can sometimes throw off what we call a reversion style foliage, which is you see more of that Aminum style leaf. Villa Toronto's one that's known for possibly throwing the typical Linearilobum style leaf, but also throwing some of that reversion like growth across it as well, creating not only a dynamic contrast in the color, but also in the foliage you find on Villa Toronto.
Now, if you've got this one from a reputable nursery that grew it the right way, there's no reason to prune that out. Typically, the next season, it will slow down and become the thinner growth. A lot of times on these, the newest growth will look more palmatum-like, and people will say, I've got a reversion there. I need to prune all that out. That can happen. Now, the best way to produce Linearilobums is graft into Acer palmatum subspecies palmatum. You'll find that some places are grafted into Amoenums, and those are trees that have a leaf shape more like Osakazuki. We do tend to find more reversions on trees grafted to those larger leaf styles. So grafting to a small leaf green tends to give you less of that overall. Villa Toronto, probably the Japanese maple in this group, probably the Linearilobum in this group that has the most contrast within itself. Typically at around 6 foot tall, 5 foot wide sometimes, grows in a more of a small V shape overall.
Now, before we get into the top 3, there's not many Linearilobums, so I'm just going to mention a few other Linearilobums that did not make our list, but they're still excellent plants. You know, Linearilobums is something that's found only in gardens. It's something that's only been cultivated. It's not something you find in the wild, so there's not a whole lot of these Linearilobums out there. Some ones that did not make our list, Aka Hosada, Al Shimina Uchi, sometimes referred to as Al Shimina Uchi Shidari, Bini Ubigohan, Genshi, Kaiser, Koto Ito Kamachi we were talking about earlier. We've got Red Falcon, Schmitz Woods, and Woods Linearilobum selection, which may or may not be similar to Bini Otaki.
Great plants, guys. Let's jump right into our top 3. You know these are classics, except for one. One's kind of new, but they're mostly classics. Number 3, we've got Koto no Ito. Now, how could you do a list of Linearilobums without doing Koto no Ito? Probably the number 1 seller of any of these if we went sales-wise, especially if we went just out of MrMaple, like internationally. Koto no Ito, probably the most popular of this group.
One of the reasons I like Cotonuito is it has larger foliage on the very end tips of the growth, but the older foliage is very thin. And when you do this, you get a very airy, open look, and it creates a dynamic texture in the garden. And when we put this behind a Makawa at Maplewood Gardens, it draws your eye across the entire garden because you start to see the diversity that maples can have, and simply just with the texture and the foliage.
It's whimsical. I love it. It's got a cool look to it. Great yellow fall color. I mean, I've had this one be highlighter yellow. It's a green that holds that color throughout most of the spring and summer. You can get some little bit of bronzing on the new growth late, but I absolutely love Cotonuito. It's a beautiful upright plant, typically at around 6 to 8 foot in 10 years. I like when you get some width on this one as it starts to get some good branching going on. Really just becomes just a real character in the garden. I mean, it has its own characteristic unto itself. Kind of feels like just a perfect little piece of relaxing nature to me.
Now, when this tree first leaves out in the early spring, it is perhaps one of the thinnest leaves of any of the Linearilobum styles. And afterwards, it's still extremely thin, but I mean, it looks almost thread-like leaf as it's actually leafing out. It has a nice chartreuse green color, which defines itself very differently than many of the other Linearilobum. So it gives a very lively feel out there in the garden and landscape. And being that it is a good medium-sized Linearilobum, it fits in many people's yards and it's easy to use. And it's one of those trees that everybody needs a Cotonuito in their garden.
All right, y'all, coming in here at number 2, and then 1 and 2, we could change them out a good bit. They're both high up on our list. Big fan of this one, big fan of Led Zeppelin, so you probably can guess where this one's going. We've got Acer palmatum cashmere.
This is a selection from the Area 51 collection here at Mr. Maple. It was actually a seedling from Cotonuito that we'd found that has extremely thread-like foliage. And the thread-like foliage is very irregular.
Gets a weird curl to it.
It gets a very weird twist and curl to it that is very, rock and roll.
You're very rock and roll, Tim. I like that. Cashmere, we were listening to some Zeppelin. I like some classic rock. We were listening to some Cashmere, and it kind of just inspired this kind of that sitar feeling rock going through the air there a little bit. Really a fun plant. Now, Cashmere is super durable. It's been a little bit more durable for us than fairy hair with some of those thinner style foliages. So typically Cashmere is going to be around 8 to 10 foot. This is one we got to Talon Buckholz pretty early on, so they've been growing this at Buckholz Farm for a while. Talon has been a fan of it as well. I think one of the main benefits of this one, it's going to give you a fairy hair-like tree that's going to grow down to that zone 5.
I like it because it is thinner foliage than Cotonuito and more vigorous than fairy hair. Mm-hmm. So it fits right in between there with that twisted leaf. It gives it a little bit something extra. Good vigorous grower and some good oranges to reds in the fall.
All right, guys, we're all the way down to number 1. Can you guess what it is? First, make sure to remember after the podcast, go give us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe to us on the Mr. Maple Show YouTube channel. Guys, coming in here at number 1, drum roll, we've got Acer palmatum Yellow Threads.
Yeah, Yellow Threads is a selection by Talon Buckholz. It's one of his later introductions, and to me, it's one of my favorite of his introductions. It gives you a good yellow color, one of the best yellow colors on any Linearilobum.
Cue the yellow dance.
Yellow dance.
It's been a minute. He doesn't yellow dance much these days. You've been slowing down the yellow dance. It is one of the most next level ones of these because you don't really get a lot of yellow going on. And this truly can have some spring highlighter yellow. Give this some early morning sun to peak up those yellows. I find that gives it a more bleached out look. You get a better color if you're giving it early morning sun, late day shade. It pairs so great with everything on this list, guys. I mean, put this next to your Punk Hill. Put this next to your Villa Toronto. I think the colors are just immaculate. And I think it's a great tree for the container garden, too. It's more of a multi-stemmed tree. Looks amazing. And it adds that texture and that yellow. So it's not only you're getting the cashmere, the Cotonuito, the Linearilobum textures going on in the garden, you're getting something with some bright yellow.
Yeah, give this tree some sunlight to really peak the yellow colors on Yellow Threads. We did a full cultivar highlight at our parents' home and gardens and Maplewood Gardens. And this tree, when the light hits it, it glows. And you can see that. You can actually see that in the video. Sometimes it's hard to capture it. We captured it. It is yellow. And it is one of the brighter yellows that you can put out there in the garden. While this pairs very well with something like Punkill with that darker color, I was thinking the exact same thing. It also pairs well with something that many people have, like a Bloodgood or an Emperor One. You've got that larger foliage with that darker red color, something like Linearilobum with that thinner leaves of yellow threads that's a little bit shorter and wider with yellow color, pairs extremely well with your typical red upright.
Or red lace leaves. There's so many ways to go in the garden with this. Looks great in the conifer garden. There's so many good uses for a yellow Linearilobum. Again, texture's wild, color's wild. Absolutely love it. Golden yellows in the fall. Great overall plant. Works zones 5 through 9. I'm a big fan of yellow threads. Maybe we've got it number 1 here for a reason. I think it's my favorite Linearilobum of them all.
Yeah, to me, it's a winner, and it's a winner with yellow color. So you know how I love the color yellow. It just brings out all the colors in the landscape, and that's what yellow threads does in a shorter, denser form to fit in the garden and still give you that Linearilobum style, that strap leaf Japanese maple that people are just drawn to.
Now, if there's trees on this list you don't see available on MrMaple.com currently, you can always sign up to get notified via email when they're back in stock. We bring new trees every Tuesday and Thursdays to our website at 10 a.m. Eastern, so be signed up for that email. Thanks so much for listening, guys.
Take care.
God bless.
And have a great day.